Okay. It's a really interesting question when I'm asked how was I brought to spirituality, because, you know, genetically I belong to the continent of Africa and there's such strong spirituality there. So in a way I came into the world with something, and I think that because of my start in the world, things got really covered up. And I had a very Christian upbringing, but at the same time, you know, when I think of spirituality, I think of the spirit world. At the same time, I was very much in touch with the spirit world, because the people who took care of me, I grew up in Bernardo homes, the orphanages, Dr. Bernardo's. They were very much into the Ouija board. So I was very aware of poltergeists being in the house, that there were poltergeists, and very aware of spirits in the house. So I was very aware of something other. I was, and also I think that what really maybe put me back on the path is I had this friend called Anne. I always call it the summer of love. And I would have been about 7, she would have been 9 or 10, but she had a hole in her heart. And I met her in the sandpit in front of my house because I'd been told to leave the table. And so I went into the pantry and stole a piece of raw jelly, went into the sandpit, and I can remember the jelly falling into the sandpit and being completely distressed. You know, raw jelly, that's it. If it falls into the sandpit, it's a goner. And she was in the sandpit, and there was something about her that was just very compassionate, and we became friends. And I call it the summer of love because she she knew she was going to die. She had a hole in her heart and she knew she was going to die. And I asked questions. It's like, you know, I can't remember what I would have asked, but I can remember her telling me that she was going to go to heaven and be with the angels, and that she was going to be okay. And then one day towards the end of the summer, she didn't come out to play, and she had died. And for me, there was nobody who I spoke to about it. I obviously I was told, and I did go to the funeral, and I can remember the funeral being in the cemetery, and I can remember her body being lowered into this hole and just being completely distressed. Is she in there? Are her toys in there? And being really, really distressed. So I definitely, that was a place of reflection for me, because I think what it did was it scared me about death and really put me on a reflection around death. And then I would say that in Bernardo's, the people who worked there were missionaries. They went there because they had a message from God. You know, you'd say, why did you work here? I had a message from God, who told us that we had to go and look after these poor little children. And I can remember going on Christian pilgrimages. So, and I just remember experiencing peace and some bliss around that. And so in a way, I just think that my life was always heading towards some kind of spirituality. But then I let go of Christianity. I had a very traumatic experience, and that I was sent back to live with my biological mother. And, you know, I got taken away by the police maybe 18 months later, and she was taken to court. And it was a very traumatic experience. And, you know, I'm lucky to come out of it alive, physically alive and mentally alive. And I can remember, but during that time, the escape I had, and that's the one beautiful thing I can think about my biological mother, and I have definitely moved into forgiveness, but looking at that time, was she bought me a picture Bible for my passing the 11 plus. And it was this big book. It had a white kind of plastic cover and this picture book and the stories about Jesus. And I immersed myself in that. I just went into that world. That was my survival. It was a place of peace, bliss, escape. Yeah. And when I was taken away, I can't remember at what point, but I can remember thinking, if there was a God, and if there is a God, why did he let me suffer so much? Why did I suffer so much? If there really was a God, why did I have to suffer so much? And I was really distressed by this, very distressed. And I realize now, when I think about it, there's something about the Christian tradition. You pray and you're passive, but praying has to be an active thing as well, not like you pray and you wait to be saved. That there has to be something active, and I was very much passive and was waiting to be saved. Yeah. And if I'd been more active, I would have got out of that situation earlier. I mean, the police tried to take me away before, and I was like, no, 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 no. And then when I went to university, I had a friend, and we had a pact that if any of us joined the Christians, CND, the Communist Party, Socialist Worker Party, we had to give the other person £100, which was a lot of money then. So I never joined any of those things. And I would say the aperture opened up for me. Well, the aperture initially, I would say, opened up for me when I was incarcerated. As a young person, I was incarcerated. I was in children lockup. I was in Borstal, pickpocketing, shoplifting, that kind of stuff. And I did a lot of solitary confinement, and the aperture definitely opened. I saw into a different dimension. I just saw into a different dimension, especially when you do so much solitary confinement. I lost a lot of time. I thought it was another kid's home. And again, being on the dance floor, when I came out, I went inside when I was 15 and I came out when I was 17. And the nightclub was the church for me. That was my church, going to the nightclubs. I'm that era of soul rebels, that soul rebels era, and Global Village, and Isaac Julian. I'm that Isaac Julian era, and being on that dance floor. And there was always this were you a street dancer, or had you gone to ballet, or had you gone to dance school? There was this real snobbery during that time. I was a street dancer. And when I got myself out of the way on that dance floor, no drugs, no nothing, I could do anything. It was like whatever I wanted to do, I could do. And so again, knew that there was just something bigger than me if I got myself out of the way. I got into drugs. And as I say, coming back to university, actually it was before university, I can remember studying philosophy during my A-levels and becoming aware of Descartes, and Descartes sitting in a stove room refuting everything and coming to this thing, I think, therefore I am. And I was completely fascinated. I mean, he got it wrong in my spiritual tradition. I think, therefore I'm not, it's not therefore I am. But it fascinated me. And when I dropped acid, I wanted to be Descartes. I had these insights, but obviously they just didn't make any sense at all. And then the journey is that my first adult job, because I had other jobs, but my first full-time job that I trained as a journalist, and I went to Australia for a couple of years and covered Aboriginal deaths in custody and Aboriginal land rights. And I had the opportunity to go and live indigenously with the Yolngu people of Yirrkala. So it's in that tiny tip. There's a couple of tips in Australia, and this tiny tip. And that completely put me back on my feet. It's like it was a turning around for me. And I knew that I couldn't appropriate that culture. And I had the opportunity to be with people who hadn't had contact with the West, only the elders. So I was around people who just hadn't had contact with the West. And that was just, it was such a healing, time for me. I smile because I can remember one of the things they said to me. They said, "Oh, you're pale black. You know, look how dark I am." It's like I'd never been called pale before in my life, but they could see that my skin hadn't had the sun.
They spoke English.
The elders, because the elders were the ones who managed to get the land back during the land rights time. Some of the elders had to, that whole legal thing of reclaiming the land. So in the Northern Territories, it's Indigenous land that basically you have to have permission to go into certain parts of the territories. You can't just go, it belongs to the Indigenous people. But to get that land, there were the chiefs, some of the chiefs who, I don't know where, that they had learned English, and maybe some of those chiefs may have been people who were on missions and managed to get away from missions and gone back. But there were many who didn't speak any English at all. So I was very quiet. There wasn't much talking. I slept under a tree. That was my bedroom. And I used to carry a tiger balm. I still carry a tiger balm. And every day I'd be looking for my tiger balm, and I could never find this flipping tiger balm. And somebody would point to me, and it was put back in the same place. I had to think out of the box. The tree was my shelf. And I had to understand that a different branch was a shelf. And in a way, I entered into part of that dream time. There was so much sitting. Basically, there was just so much sitting. And one of the things I always remember is that just as we are sitting opposite each other, in the tribe I was with, or the clan I was with, they didn't sit opposite each other. They sat facing the land they had been taken from. So some of these people had reclaimed the land, but that might not have been the first land they were on. So if I was having a conversation with you, I would be facing that way and still be having a conversation with you, because I would be facing the land from where I came. And it was just a lot of sitting. Basically, if there was a fire, that was the only time I experienced being in a circle. And there wouldn't be these piles of sticks. There would just be one big log, and that would be it. And you just sit. And I was taught, never look into the fire, because if you look right into the flames of the fire, it will send you crazy. Always look beyond the flames. And I really see that as a metaphor of never look right into the mind, because if you do, it will send you crazy. Always look beyond the mind. What is the mind pointing you to? But anyway, just coming back to that, I knew that I had to come back to England to do the work, because one of the questions they asked me was, where are you Indigenous to? The elders, where are you Indigenous to? I had absolutely no idea. I didn't even know what Indigenous meant. Where am I Indigenous to? I had no idea. And I realized I had to go back to England to do the work. And when I returned to England, it was transcendental meditation that first fell into my lap, and then more traditionally Buddhist meditation. I returned when I was 27. I had friends from the Black women's community who were offering meditation. I always say that was what the good people did. That's what the good girls did. I was a bad girl. I went out and clubbed and raved, and which I did. That was my church. And something began to change. I had a lot of healing to do. So in a way, my healing brought me more and more closer to my spirituality. And it's changing. I mean, it's a really great question, because I've really got to a point in my life, you know, I'm in my 50s now, and I've got to a point in my life that all my spirituality, whether it be Christianity, whether it be Buddhism, or whether it be mindfulness, it's all been through the white Western lens. And I've really kind of sat up and thought, actually, I need to imbibe spirituality, which is through an African lens. What is that? I just realized there was a part of me when I work with Black people or Black Indigenous people of color, I'm still coming from this white Western model. And that there was a cause of I wouldn't say distress, but actually a cause of, it's time to wake up. And what are you going to do about that? And that is changing, you know, the whole ancestralization and becoming aware of ancestralization, doing ancestor work, working more and more closely with African descent women, and reclaiming something, because inherently it's in me, but the white Western culture has stamped it out of me. I speak about the codependency of racism, and how codependent we as Black or people of color have become, so that we can fit nicely into this white Western model, not to upset the apple cart, not to make white people feel uncomfortable. And if we do that, we can feel better. And that's what I've done. And it's like, actually, I have to pull away this codependency and really step into my ancestral power. So my spirituality is continually changing. You know, I'm involved with a group of people of just really looking more and more, how do we make mindfulness culturally specific? You know, mindfulness is our birthright. It's anybody's birthright, but yet you introduce this to an African descent community, an Asian community, and people would just see that it's like, oh, this is white Western stuff. And it's not, no, this is our birthright. But actually I can see why, because it's so couched in white Western mentality. So my spirituality continues to evolve. So that's the long answer to your question.
Well, there's so many things I want to pick up on about what you just said, but it's just with this, I'm actually quite surprised about that. It's something that Kevin was saying on the last interview, that his link to Buddhism is never through Asia, it's through white American teachers. And I'd never actually thought about that. Does that mean that most of the people whom you attempt to introduce mindfulness to are seeing it as a white thing?
No, what I think what Kevin is saying, in the States, if we look at Buddhism, which has been made accessible to the West. So there have been, of course, there are Asian people who brought Buddhism to the West. In fact, the Nichiren, the ones who chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, that was actually brought to the West by a Japanese woman, which is really interesting, because that is the school of Buddhism where there's enough people of color, enough Black people, enough working class people. So that's really interesting. And because it isn't so building focus. and you chant, you know, you think it's like you can chant for material stuff. You realize that this, in the end, this material stuff isn't going to bring you happiness, but that's the doorway in, especially if you come from oppressed cultures, you come from a refugee culture, an immigrant culture, a working class culture. um, Often material things, it's going to be something one is needed, and if you can chant for material things, that's appealing. You know, you don't want to be studying suttas, you know, studying the teachings. And coming back to your question, Buddhism brought to the West for the Western psyche was brought by many Jewish people.
Right.
People like Jack Cornfield, people like Sharon Salzberg, people like the Bachelors, people like Stephen Levine. And so Buddhism has been expressed through that culture, and that's the beauty of Buddhism. It's a living, on one level, it's a living doctrine. Not that the Four Noble Truths change, or the Eightfold Path change, or all these different teachers change, but whoever imbibes it, you express it through that culture. If you think that, we have to remember that Buddhism predates Buddhism predates the Shakyamuni Buddha, because we have to remember that the Buddha rediscovered the way. So if the Buddha rediscovers the way, we know that Buddhism existed before that Buddha. But if we use that as a starting point of 2,600 years ago of Shakyamuni Buddha, it disappears from India and it goes to places like Tibet, it goes to places like Burma, it goes to places like Japan, China. Now, if you look in all those different countries, the Buddhism is expressed differently. You know, what brings us together are the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, but there are different teachings. Then we see Buddhism having a resurgence by King Ashoka. And then again, it disappears. And then we see another resurgence through Dr. Ambedkar in more modern times. And again, the point I'm making is that the Buddhism, it changes with whoever is whoever wants to take on these teachings. And in a way, that's what I want to say is that Buddhism, the word Buddhism actually comes from Western culture, okay? Because the word Buddha just means awake. It means woke, okay? That's what it means. It means woke. And if we think of Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, Buddhism going to Vietnam, and in a way it's called interbeing, this thing of Buddhism. What is Buddhism? You have people like the Dalai Lama and the people like Thich Nhat Hanh, before he had the major stroke, was very clear that one doesn't have to convert to be a Buddhist, that these teach, you know, if you are a Catholic, if you are a Muslim, if you are a Hindu, if you are a Christian, you can practice these teachings. One doesn't have to convert. So in answer to your question, it's not that it's just white people who come, but that's the Buddhism we have. It's very cognitive, it's very intellectual. If we look at Buddhism in England, the strand of Buddhism that I'm in, I'm ordained into the Triratna Buddhist community, which was once called Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. In itself, the name Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. And this is a Buddhism that was made accessible to the Western psyche, and at the same time, my teacher Sangharakshita, keeping the traditional ways of being, keeping the traditional teachings, but made it accessible to the Western psyche. And it's one of the major schools of Buddhism in Europe, not the only one. New Kadampa is very big, but the Buddhism that I'm in was brought to the West by a white Western teacher. And so it's expressed through that body. Buddhism is expressed through that body. Yeah.
Mm. No,
And
it's
one more thing, a friend of mine said to me that he studies in Courageous Conversations about race, and they talk about feeling, thinking, action, and there's one more. And he was saying that the white Western world are far more the
yeah.
thinking, the cognitive, whereas our culture is more the feeling and the action. Yeah, but sorry, I
Mm.
interrupted you. You were going to
No, it's
ask.
just it just makes complete sense because I do Vipassana, Goenka Vipassana, and I just wonder sometimes why I don't have many friends from that practice. I sort of avoid it. And I've realized it's because I feel culturally alienated from it, not from Goenka himself, and not when I'm in India. It's in Germany or in Britain, because there's this sort of very bland kind of cerebral, austere culture seems to emerge, and not very emotional. And Goenka's not like that. And so I see no
You're
reason
right.
why the practice should be like that. But everyone I know who does it is like that. And
You're
very sort
right.
of, you know,
You're right, because I've sat several. I have sat several uh, Goenka retreats. I got thrown off one.
did you, what was that for?
I'll tell you why.
All right.
But I sat in Igapuri,
Yeah, me
uh,
too, actually. Yeah.
and it's so different. Forget silence is
Mm,
so different. It's just,
yeah.
it was beautiful. It was like, wow, I'm in a community of practitioners, and I had to say it had the same impact, but it was just very, very
Mm,
different from sitting in Hereford,
right.
or in England, or sitting in Canada when I was just across the border. So I got thrown off. Definitely, definitely white fragility going on there.
What
Uh,
happened?
what happened was that they came and asked me, "What's my name?" And I said, Vimalasara. Somebody came back 10 minutes later and said, "What's your given name?" I said, Vimalasara. 15 minutes later, somebody said, "What's your name on your passport?" I said, Valerie Mason-John. And then I polarized. I thought, right, if they're going to call me Valerie, so I polarized. So, when you go in the hall for the first time and you've got your spot, I
Mm,
became aware of somebody calling Valerie, because I'm not used to being called Valerie. It's still my pen name and right under that, but most people call me Vimalasara. And so I went up and I just said, "I want you to call me Vimalasara." And they just said, "Absolutely no way," polarization. And so they asked me to what they said, that I would meet the person who was in charge. So I came, and it was awful. The woman was almost screaming at me. It was really,
oh my God.
yeah, it was really horrible. And then I was there with my partner. My partner had the passports and the money, and they wouldn't let me speak to my partner. So I was they took me. I couldn't leave the country. My partner had the passports.
Which country was this?
This was the States. It was just across the Canadian border. So it was Canadians who were doing it. So the people at Merritt, the people from Merritt,
Mm,
crossed the border. I had no money. So luckily I was quite, when I think of that, just touching into that the white woman who drove me was really compassionate, because she left her credit card on the motel, because I had nothing. It was like,
mm,
yeah, it was, and but I had the best ever retreat. I had a best, but I had no, I had very little. I can't very little. I lived on seeds and bananas. I had very little,
mm.
so um so yeah, so that was it. So I
It's
never went
crazy.
back to another
Oh, I'm sorry you had that experience. I really am. That's,
yeah,
yeah. So,
yeah.
I mean, when you tell the story of your life, it sounds like you grew up without much love, and that must have been very, very traumatic, that entire experience. And I'm wondering how you managed to, what healing work, what was the main, a lot of people I don't think would have come out of that. So what was the main kind of thing that enabled you to heal?
Yeah, it's really good to see that, because I knew hate as a child, but I didn't know love. I can remember as a child sitting there wanting to be held, and nobody would come to hold me. I don't know why I couldn't ask. Well, I suppose you didn't ask an orphanage, but it's just sitting there. And
They
I
didn't hold
had
the children in the orphanage? There was no physical affection in the orphanage?
I no, no, no. And we weren't be in my household. I can't, because Bernardo's, it's, you live in a village with cottages with house parents, so it could be very different in another household, in another cottage. But in my cottage, I never, I don't remember any being held, or yeah, yeah.
Mm.
But I mean, basically my name was Gruesome. That was my name. And I knew it was a really horrible name. Yeah, and the adults, it came from the adults, but of course if it comes from the adults, the kids call you that too.
Mm.
And I was polarized with Jackie, who's like my children's home sister, Jacqueline, because Jacqueline is Black albino.
Right.
So we were polarized, like she was the good one, I was the bad one. She was the pretty one, I was the ugly one. She had, obviously, she had, they put a wig on her and blah 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 and whatever, but we were pitched against each other, and she was older. So just even in that, my it was a very lonely time there. I went there at the age of 5, and that was very traumatic, because I couldn't understand why I had left this foster home to go there, which was very traumatic. So things about love, I suppose the love that I did, God loves you. I think that was where I knew God loved you. That was the love. And then my biological mother was completely incapable of love. And then the physical contact was, you know so was off the chart. There's definitely no holding, and just, yeah. So I won't go into that to traumatize people. So I had a really negative self-esteem,
Mm.
and there was just, I um what I had, and what I realized that was very different, because when I was placed back into care, I went into what would be called assessment centers while I was waiting for my mother to go to court and for it to all go through. And many of the kids had grown up with their parents from dot, but I hadn't. I had some, I knew when my meals were coming through, I had clothing. I never had to worry about where I was going to eat next, or I had that kind of stability and security. And so I really do believe that was that stability really, really, it set me up for life, that stability.
Mm.
And I had a good education. I I was fortunate to take 11 plus, and so I could fall back on education. So it was education was my passport out. you know when I came out of Borstal, I was 17. I had a foster mother, so she showed me love. I was
Mm.
always a likable kid. I was always People always wanted to give me a home and adopt me, but it was like, nah. After that experience with my biological mother, nobody. I'd lost faith in human. I'd lost faith in humans, and nobody was going to take care of me. And I had Carol, who you know, she offered to give me a home and put me through college. You know, I went back, I did my O levels, I did my A levels, took a year out, went to university. I dropped out the first time. I dropped out, studied as a journalist. So that was my passport. And I would say that traveling before that, I went to Palestine, you know, Israel. I did a kibbutz, so the world had opened up. I did that as a gap year. But going to Australia, I didn't. That was my first bit of healing, going to Australia, because overnight I became exotic. Overnight I was beautiful. People would come up and tell me how beautiful I was, every day. You couldn't put it in a pill. So, you know, I went from being dark, you're ugly, blah, 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 to being just beautiful overnight because I was exotic. And I learned I had to, it was like, wow, you know, I wouldn't even, before I wouldn't go out and let myself go darker in the sun. I'll always let myself go darker in the sun. But I learned I learned to love myself. And when I came back, I could say to dark skinned people, you're beautiful. And they would mirror that back. And so that, and then I learned love. On a particular level, I have a lot of gratitude because I wasn't really familiar with love. It wasn't, you know, I had friends, but it was the Dharma, the metta, loving kindness. It was almost like I had a bit of a blank slate. You know, many kids who grow up in their family, it's like,
Yeah.
I hit you, but I love you. You know, that's the message. I do this to you, but I love you. I never had that, you know. I was
Yeah.
abused. Nobody said, oh, that's because I love you. You know, I had the abuse, I had the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't have that. So it was like, oh, I could learn to love in this different way. I could learn to love unconditionally. And I knew I had, because for me, loving, the first time I fell in love, forget it, I was this crazy woman. I would look, I can remember looking at my lover and they would become this most beautiful being. I was so intoxicated. I was obsessed. I was Eustacia. If you've read Return of the Native, I was Eustacia, the queen of the night, who's completely obsessed with Klim. I was completely obsessed because I had never experienced this emotion of love. And I knew when that relationship came to an end, I never wanted to love like that again. I was never, ever going to love like that again. And when I came across the practice of loving kindness, I was furious after a year because it was like, I knew I was never going to love like that again. I wasn't going to have this intoxicating love again. And it taught me to love in a different way. And it taught me to love myself. I had, you know, whenever, I mean, all of us have traumas, and with those traumas, we have adaptations. That's why people have addictions. It's an adaptation to cope. My adaptation in early adolescence was disordered eating. I was an extreme anorectic to begin with, but because I was so punishing, I would cycle 3 hours and not and live. I'd have one cream cracker for breakfast, one cream cracker for lunch, and one cream cracker for the evening. That would be it. And I was completely anorectic, but because I did so much punishing, physical punishing to my body, it just couldn't cope. And so when I started eating and binging, it was like, oh my God. So I purged and I became an extreme bulimic. And that was the the way I coped. It was the self-hatred. It almost, in a way, if you hate yourself, nobody else can hate you, in a way. You know, it's
Yeah.
that psychology. And so I had to, in a way, I'm thankful for the women's movement, really, because I was able to recover. I took time, wasn't really aware of that, but I freelanced for a long while, and I recovered in the nightclubs. I I mean, the bulimia was the hardest to let go of. Letting go of the alcohol and letting go of the drugs was easy for me. Letting go of the food, which is a matter of life and death. So if listeners are thinking, how can that be a matter of life and death? I suggest you read my book, 8-Step Recovery, Using the Buddhist Teachings to Overcome Addiction. And it's very clear how it's a matter of life and death. Yeah.
Well, it's so interesting what you're saying about how you didn't have that love trap. You didn't receive the love. You received the abuse, but it wasn't mixed up with love. So and that kind of made me think about what you said about this disillusionment with Christianity as being something, to be saved, something from outside. It's almost like that's a substitute for an attachment pattern with a parent, where you're sort of begging for attachment from the parent. And in doing so, you're losing sense of yourself. You're losing your authenticity. And it sounds like that didn't happen to you, right? You didn't lose your authenticity.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. No, it's great. That's what Gabor Mate talks about. It's that we often choose attachment over authenticity. But actually, it's interesting that you say that your clarity of thinking and seeing right through there, because there's always been something authentic about me. That it's true. Yeah, it's very true. Yeah, yeah.
Because abuse can't take away that authenticity if you're not asking for something from the abuser, right? If you're not asking for love, it's almost not a classically abusive relationship. It's just getting sort of beaten up, but it's not that dance. You're not joining in that dance, I suppose.
I mean, the one way I'd say that I did lose my authenticity is that I can remember being at uni, being at college. Oh, you're so different. I didn't have to take drugs or anything like that. I could just be me. And it was almost like the drugs and the alcohol made me smaller so that people could cope with me. That was in a way where I did lose a part of that authenticity, but it's definitely come back. And then again, in a way, that codependency of racism as well. But definitely I'm somebody where I was able to have that authenticity. Yeah, definitely. And I'm
But
just smiling because I can remember the theatre people who would come to our village, and we would march around saying we were the moon people, and we could just be, I mean, some people would stay crazy, but we could just be. I could just be. Yeah.
but then if you're being authentic, I suppose, is not enough, because you can be authentic and disconnected, and you can be authentic and self-hating, kind of authentically self-hating, or authentically hating other people.
Well, what
It's
happens
this.
is that they're sometimes people talk about addiction being a disconnection to self, and the solution is the connection. And what I say is that there is a disconnection to self, but we have to have connection, and so we connect to the substance, or we connect to the behavior. That's the connection. So for me, for a long while, the connection was the food. That was food doesn't let you down. Food can be a lover. You can have pleasure from it. It's never gonna reject you in the same way, and it's a safer thing to have connection to. So there's always this thing of, yes, there's a disconnection to the self, and where is that connection happening? What is one connected to? And we have to relearn how to have a connection to the self, and then at some point let go of the self. Yeah.
Right. But first of all, we have to look at those connections before we can let go of the self.
Exactly. It's as Dogen says, one of my favorite quotes is to study the Buddha way is to study the self. One has to study the self. To study the self is to let go of the self, because one has to create a healthier self before we can even let go of the self. You can't let go of a self that's been completely which is completely dysregulated, which is completely traumatized. One has to come into relationship with a healthier self before. And if for listeners thinking, what does that mean to let go of the self? For me, what that means is letting go of all these identities that have been projected onto us, letting go of I'm unlovable, you know, letting go of I've been abandoned, letting go of these stories that create a personality which shapes the world we live in. That's what I mean by letting go of the self, is seeing through the emptiness of these stories. They're stories, and they shape our world. They shape how we interact with people. And if we can begin to let go of those stories, our whole world begins to change.
And it's also about letting go of sort of false sources of supply, false sources of love, right? Of you mentioned food, but it could be drugs, it could be money, it could be praise, it could be admiration,
All of that. Yeah.
all of that.
All
But
of
then
that.
what are we left with? We're left with authentic sources of connection. We're left with relationship. We're left with
We're
relationship
left
to
with
self.
we're left with flow. That's what we're left with. We're left with flow. This body is always changing. It's we're left with a quieter mind, because
Mm.
thoughts will arise, but we don't have to identify with them. And when we stop identifying with them and appropriating them, the mind would just become quieter. We're left with equanimity. We're left with we're left with compassion. We're left with joy. It's not that things don't happen. I never used to understand that aphorism, which was before enlightenment. And I'm not saying I'm enlightened here, I'm just using this aphorism. It's like, before enlightenment is chopping the wood and hauling the water, and after enlightenment is chopping the wood and hauling the water. And for me, I just totally get it. It's like it's
Mm.
like we change, but shit still happens, but we relate to it differently, you know.
Mm.
External we're not in control of this external stuff, you know. It's everything is uncertain, and things will happen. It's like, I cannot stop my loved one from dying or my children from dying. I cannot. That is going to happen, but how I relate to it can be very different and can give me freedom. And this is why it's so great to do that healing work. When I work with clients, sometimes I say, do you want freedom? What do you want? Do you want freedom, or do you want misery? Yeah, because it is possible to have freedom. Yeah, it is possible.
What is it freedom from? Is it freedom from identity? Is it freedom from the illusion of self?
I to to make it accessible, let's quote Bob Marley: free yourself from mental slavery.
Mm.
No one but yourself can free yourself. I've got that last line a bit. None but ourselves can free ourselves, but
Free our
free yourself
minds.
from mental slavery. And so, in a way, for me, it's freedom from the prison of the mind. Most
Mm.
people live here and they've lost connection from the body, from
Mm.
neck downwards, and they're just connected with the stinking thinking. Yeah,
Mm.
it's possible to have thoughts without a thinker, thoughts without a stinker. It's possible. We do not have to think these thoughts. Yeah. So for me, it's definitely freedom from the prison of the mind. Our mind keeps us imprisoned.
No, that's interesting because you're talking about these Australian Aboriginal,
Mm,
this group that I
mm.
believe that they have different words for mind. That they have a mind of the body, they have a mind of the stomach. I think. Did you encounter any of that when you were with them?
I have no, I'd maybe, you know, I've destroyed quite a few brain cells, maybe, but I know that in the East, mind and heart is one. And
Mm.
actually, if in my book, Detox Your Heart, I talk about the mind being divorced from the heart. It's almost like with anger, we push the mind pushes the heart out, and how can we get the mind
Mm.
to drop back into the heart? Yeah. So and now there's a lot of evidence in the addiction world about the gut being the mind. In fact, that
Yeah.
was the mind, the gut. And actually, if the gut is out of sorts, then it's really going to impact our moods, our emotions, and how we are. But in answer to your question, I it could be true, but I don't have a memory. I'll ask a friend of mine. I have a good friend of mine actually, who is Aboriginal Australian and who still lives out there. Yeah.
No, I'd like to pursue what you said though about the gut being the mind. That's fascinating. And you mentioned Gabor Mate, and I think he was a mentor of yours. Was he at one point, Gabor Mate?
I work with Gabor Mate. He definitely is a mentor, a teacher. Very fortunate, and in fact, I met Gabor. I hope I'm saying his name correctly, Gabor. I When I wrote the book on addiction, and I live in Vancouver, so it's the home of Gabor Mate. He is the guru of addiction in this part of the world, along with people like Bruce Alexander. And I saw that he was a Hungarian Jew immigrant, and I just thought, great, let me ask if he would write a forward to the book. Didn't know, and he responded and said yes. I'm like, that was the relationship. He's a very generous person in so many different ways. And then there was somebody called Sat Dharam who had done so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that work, how they came together, but Sat Dharam is a force of nature, and really sat Gabor down and said, we really need to make your work into some modality, and began to follow Gabor. And then it got to a point where Gabor and Sat Dharam chose 10 people, I think 10 or 12 people, to help put this modality together. So I was one of them, and helped, supported, and put that modality together. And so now I work as a senior trainer, a senior facilitator practitioner in compassionate inquiry. And the reason why I got into compassionate inquiry is because I was doing inquiry in my own work anyway. People would say, what is it that you're doing? What is it that you're doing? So for me, it was great to learn the science of inquiry. It's like you do this thing, but when people say, what is it that you're doing? But when you learn the science, then it gives you the building blocks and the stepping stones, and then you can break out of that form. So again, I've learned another modality through a white Western Jewish filter.
Yeah.
So I'm just at the point I'm actually just signed on to a course which was founded by Richard Schwartz, which actually it sounds like it could be a German name or Jewish name, Richard Schwartz, of internal family systems. But they are just doing a course just for Black people. Wow. So I've just put I thought this would be interesting for me to do this course on internal family systems with just Black people and see what that's like. But so in answer to your question, I do work with Gabor. Yeah.
No, because I just did some time ago, I did a 4-day trauma workshop with him, and Satharam was on there too. I had a brief exchange with her, and I thought it was a tremendously powerful method. No, there was just one moment during the course where I kind of lost it, where Gabor was quoting James Baldwin, and he used the N-word as part of the quote. And then someone said you shouldn't do that, and he got a bit defensive with them. And I sort of flipped out, and I just kind of lost it. He turned into this ogre in front of my eyes. I thought I couldn't listen to anything he was saying. I'd learned so much until then. And now I just felt scared and anxious, and I couldn't trust him. And I wasn't listening to anything. My breathing was going. So I sent a message to Satharam, and I said, look, this is happening. And she said, do you want to talk to someone in another room? I said, yeah, okay. So I went to talk to someone in another room, and the person said, what happened? And I said, oh, Gabor used the N-word. And I said, I'm not Black myself, but I've been called that about 1,000 times at school, where I was the only non-white person. and it just flipped me out. And I know it's not, he hasn't really done anything wrong. He doesn't really know. He's in his 70s, whatever. He thought he was just reading a quote, but I've gone completely mad and I don't know what to do. And she said, right, okay, so observe everything in your body. And, I do Vipassana, so that wasn't so hard. I could do that. And she said, look at your breath. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that. And then she said, now, is that a new feeling? How are you feeling? She said, I think. And I said, I'm completely exhausted and everything hurts and I'm tired and I don't know what I want to do. And she said, is it a new feeling or an old feeling? And I said, it's very old. And then she said, what was the first, when did you first have this feeling? And I said, and the incredible thing about it was the answer was just there. I never thought about any of her questions. It was just, and I said, well, I'm 4, I'm walking into school. There's a whole line of white kids on either side of me and they're all shouting racist insults at me. And then she took it from there to, okay, now who did you tell about that? I said, nobody. I said, I never spoke about any of this. She said, well, that's the root of the trauma because it's the disconnection. And then she said, now there's only one person who can help this child, and that's you. And then we did some inner child work. And she said, okay, go and talk to this child. How is the child feeling? What do you want the child to know? And I was saying that he's safe, that he's loved. And then she said, now, and then we talked about the word Paki, which I heard over and over and over and over again. I still it's very hard for me to hear that word. She said, what does it mean? And because I was in contact with my body at that moment, I knew what it meant. I said, it means nothing. It's completely meaningless. She said, yes, we give meaning to the word. And then she said, now you have to protect the child from all of that, from that word. And we did all that. And I think it took about 5 or 7 minutes, maybe.
Exactly. Yeah. Who was it? Who was your facilitator?
Phyllis.
Oh, was this just recently you did this?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, you went to the SAND conference.
Yeah. It was great.
Oh,
it was
yeah, because I was asked if I would be, I was too busy.
Yeah.
That's why I wasn't there. Oh, I'll let Phyllis know that she did a really good.
She was great.
Phyllis is great. Phyllis is an intern. Phyllis isn't one of the practice. She's just been through the course, so she did a really good job.
Yeah. And then I was released back into the wild, and I was fine again.
Yeah.
It's
fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll let her know that she did a really good job.
Well, I mean, I'd really like to continue with compassionate inquiry. I found it so effective. It seems to combine everything.
It's really it cuts to the it goes right to the core. There's none of this, it's deep. It's like the knife goes straight in and we go to the core. So and that's what I like. I mean, there's 2 ways that I work with it. Some clients I just see for half an hour and we go right to the core, and then some it's, you're seeing regular. But actually, people can come and see with that dysregulation, and in 10-15 minutes you're done, So,
it's a really full therapeutic intervention in 10 or 15 minutes. I mean, that's almost unbelievable.
Yeah. So I'm part of that crew.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you did a whole training in this?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying, that with Saptaran, there were 10 of us who put the course together under her stewardship and Gabor's stewardship. So we were the pilot. We were testing it out, and then we got accredited. We met with Gabor and we got accredited, and then we are the facilitators who run the first course. So the first course happened in January, which we run. We're now into, I think, about the 4th or 5th course. So we're the senior facilitators, and we're now working towards bringing more facilitators on board. So I've been there from nearly the beginning. So that's
So how could we describe this to people listening? I mean, it seems to me like it's a form of therapy which combines body work with inner child work and is rooted in an understanding of trauma.
Compassionate inquiry is really a compassionate inquiry into your I'm just gonna sneeze there.
Yeah.
Into the dysregulation, into whenever we're dysregulated or activated, the past is in the present.
Mm.
I don't know what's making me sneeze, but anyway, talking about compassionate inquiry and the past being in the present. So basically, this is what compassionate inquiry is that whenever we're activated, just as you were activated, as you said, you heard the word nigger, the amygdala went off, you went into complete space. The past was in the present. You were that young kid walking into school again, because the body keeps the score, which is one of Gabor's books, you know, and the body has a memory. Yeah, and that's what we then identify with, and we get lost because we become this person in the past. And what compassionate inquiry does is to get you to see that, to see what you're making it all mean, and to bring you back into the present. Yeah. And also it's also seeing that some of these things are adaptations. They have a function. They have a function. It's not like, oh, you do this because you're bad. Actually, it actually serves a purpose. Yeah. So it's not saying that these things don't happen, and it's not saying that what Gabor did was inappropriate. No, that's not what we're saying. I'm not saying that wasn't inappropriate. That's another thing. What we're saying is that when you heard it, past was in the present. Yeah. And how can we heal? How can we heal that? Yeah. So when it happens again, you'll know it's like, oh, and actually I can make it mean something different, because sometimes she could have gone with, it's like, okay, they called you Paki or nigger. What did you make it mean? What did you make it mean? Yeah. And we could say, well, we'll make it mean that we're dirty, we're horrible, we're like this. Well, what do you think? What could be a different possibility of why they called you that? Well, it could be because you were different, you looked different, maybe smelled different, because they were scared, but yet we choose the worst one. Yeah. And we make it mean that, you know, and then we can get it. What else could you begin to make it mean? Yeah. So it's great. It works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. Yeah. And again, there is that part of actually with you, Gabor being this guru, and then he let you down. And so there would be like, there's another inquiry.
Yeah.
Who let you down?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That's an
Yeah. That's
inquiry.
brilliant. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. I missed that one, but I like that a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And with trauma, is it possible to heal trauma or to kind of make it go away? Or is it a process of learning to live with it in a intelligent manner, empathic manner?
What I say is that the impact of trauma, because the trauma's gone, isn't it? We've had the trauma. It's like the abuse or whatever it was is gone, or the parent dying, that's gone. So what we can begin to do is we can begin to let go of stories. And what can happen is these stories have less gravitational pull on you. So in a way, you don't get pulled down that same rabbit hole. So it's like, in a way, coming back to, if you hear the word nigger and it's like that, you can actually, oh, okay, this isn't about me. This doesn't mean anything. And it stops you getting completely dysregulated. Yeah. So in a way, it's like, can the trauma ever go away? For some people, it's a lifetime journey. I mean, I sometimes I say to people who I'm working with, I'm going to say, this will take a lifetime to work with the amount of trauma that you can have. But yes, we can have more freedom from the impact of trauma, most definitely. I have so much more freedom from the trauma that I've had, so much more freedom. And it would be nice to have some more freedom. So yes, you know, but it's like, I think this is what gets us into trouble, and just coming into addiction, because as something that Gabor says is that, and I believe it too, not just him, it's like we all experience trauma, okay? No matter what race we are, we all experience trauma, but not everybody has trauma, has addictions, but everybody who has addictions has trauma, okay?
Yeah.
And that is because sometimes we may have had somebody to speak to, and I've just slightly lost the thread of what I was going to say there. So maybe I just need to pause. Yeah. That was what I was going to say. Yes. Is that one of the things that can keep us stuck in the trauma, that we are going for gold. We think like we should never ever feel like this again. Never ever feel like this again. This is why some people relapse in addiction. Never ever going to have a thought about drinking again. Never ever. Well, you ask anybody who's had abstinence and been in recovery, have you ever had a thought of drinking again? Yes, but it has less gravitational pull on you. Yeah. So you know, in answer to your question, it's not about getting rid of it. It's that actually it just doesn't have the same pull on you. It doesn't have the same magnetism on you. And sometimes it's like, why do we want to hold on to the story? Sometimes, you know, some people hold on to the story. Sometimes I might say to clients, how much longer do you want to hold on to this story? Yeah. We can hold on to the story even after parents have died. And we're still holding on to the story, which keeps us stuck. But there's a function. There's a function, because actually to begin to let go of the story, we have to begin to change. Yeah. We have to do something different. Yeah. It suits us sometimes to hold the story so that we can still stay in that victim role. Yeah.
And why does it suit us? And what do we do? Do we create a new story?
It suits us because it protects us from the pain. Okay? Yeah. It protects us from the pain. I mean, once upon a time, I would have told you I had the best ever childhood. Like, but it protected me from a pain. I remember, you know, my closest friend, the lies I would just get so pissed off, the lies she would tell about her, and that she was wealthy and all this and stuff. And I get it. It was like to protect her from the pain. And then some people hold on to the traumatic story. They beat me, they hurt me, they rob me, because if we let go of it, we really have to touch into the pain and the sadness and the loss and the grief of what we never had. It's easier to hold on to the story. They beat me, they robbed me. I mean, I'm quoting from the Dharma Pardon now. They beat me, they robbed me. Those who hold on to such thoughts, it will only instill hatred. Hatred will be instilled. Yeah.
So it's about not wanting to feel the pain consciously.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it'll still come and get you.
Exactly. But we as humans, we've got this inbuilt tendency to move away from experience, and we will go for the temporary relief. Some people are too scared they don't want to go there. They don't want to, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there, you know?
And that causes all kinds of mental illnesses.
Exactly.
In fact, most of them, I would imagine.
Yeah. Which is why, coming back to the Buddhist teachings, one of the things that I make it really clear, and certain books have got it really wrong, because many of us are looking for enlightenment, you know, and if we put it in more lay people's language, we want happiness. Why wouldn't we want happiness? Yeah. And in a lot of books, it says that the Buddha vowed to find enlightenment. He didn't. The Buddha vowed to find an end of suffering. That's very different. So are you going to go for enlightenment, or are you going to go for an end of suffering? And to find an end of suffering, you have to face the suffering. If we look at the legend of the prince and how the prince becomes woke, it was the prince facing his suffering, okay? It wasn't like all these bliss, 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 bliss.
Right.
You know, it past lives came up for his life. unskillful past lives came up. And then hatred came up, anger, lust, all this doubt, all these things that can unhinge us came up. And he had to see through them, see the emptiness in them, not make them mean anything. Yeah. It's a practice.
So it's not about moving towards the love and the light, it's about moving towards the pain.
It's turning towards the pain. It's coming back home to the body. Okay.
Yeah.
Many of us have fled the body. We left the body years ago. We switched off all feelings. We closed down all the sense doors. All lights have been turned off. Nobody's home, thank you very much. Okay? Yeah. And we have to come home to the body. And that's really, really difficult. And especially in times like this, we're in a time of two pandemics, COVID-19, which is a respiratory illness, and how do people come home to the body, come home to the breath? And then, of course, the other pandemic of the virus of racism. I can't breathe. We have George Floyd, we have Eric Garner. I can't breathe. How can you teach people to come home to the body, to the breath, where that's been such a traumatic place? But if we want liberation and we want freedom, we have to come home to the body somehow. Yeah. And maybe the doorway might have to be through the thinking. It's not like, okay, you've got to come home to the body. We find ways. My job, and this is the job of a compassion inquiry practitioner, is to bring you back. Because you'll do, as a client will do anything to move away, and we might move away with the client, yeah, because they're skilled. No, what we let the client take some time out, and then we gently bring them back to do the work. That's our job, is just to bring you back and hold you there and make ourselves redundant. Yeah. It's not like 10 years later, you're still working with me, Yeah.
I'm thinking about abuse then, and about our abusers. We can't try to love our abusers, right? We can't try to forgive them. That doesn't work. We have to face the pain of that abuse and understand it, understand their pain, understand our pain. And forgiveness is a byproduct of that process. Or love. Is it that we...
It's an interesting question, because I have had so much more freedom when I went into forgiveness around the abusers. And there was a quote I read many years ago: forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering and letting go. Okay. And what is forgiveness? Forgiveness for me is that when I think of my abusers, I don't go into hatred. That for me is forgiveness. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, I have to love these beings, but actually I just don't go into hatred. When I go into hatred and I go into anger, who's it going to harm? They're not even going to feel it. They're not going to even experience it. Some of them are dead and buried. They're not going to feel it. I'm still carrying this. Yeah. The work that I have to do is learning to love myself. When I learn to love myself, I take my power back. Okay. And this is why sometimes it's so difficult to connect to the body, because if we have been sexually abused or sexually assaulted, we know that the body, when it's touched in particular ways, will respond in a particular way with pleasure. And so for people who've gone through that experience, there can be a real disgust or real shame. The core of me is bad. How could I had pleasure, so it's not my fault, blah, 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 which is why they can never be with pleasure. They're people. It's not like we just turn away from unpleasant stuff. We turn away from pleasant, we turn away from unpleasant, we turn away from neutral, nothing much going on.
Mm.
And we have, and it can be a real scary place to be in touch with what's going on in the body. Yeah. So for me, no, we don't try and spend, as you say, that byproduct, try and spend, you know, time on loving the abuser.
Mm.
There is the practice of the metta where in that enemy stage, and it's called the enemy stage because when we think of these people, they become enemies of the mind. When we think of these people, we get hot under the collar, we get agitated, we get flustered, we go into narrative, our mind begins to spin. This is why they're enemies. And at some point, if you do that practice, you can put these people in your practice and wish them well. But that's not about saying that one has to love them, but to just wish them is to wish them well. And maybe we might get to the place of thinking, well, okay, this person was abused, they were sexually abused, and so there can be that doorway of, well, they were sexually abused, have compassion for them. But it's a process, but the starting point is with ourselves. We grow up with that aphorism, if we don't love ourselves, we can't love others. And I just say, no, let's debunk that, because we have to have some connection to ourselves. We love ourselves badly. I say if we love ourselves unhealthily or badly, we will love everybody else in the world unhealthily and badly.
Mm.
Yeah. So we've got this energy, it's got to latch onto something. So the work, it begins with us. Yeah. That's the work. Yeah.
And how do we love ourselves?
I'll ask you that question first. How do we love ourselves?
Well, the two things that I've tried that have worked
Mm-hmm.
for me. The first thing was inner child work.
Mm-hmm.
That really helped. Just understanding that the one person who could love the hurt child inside of me was me, and the one person who could protect that hurt child, and to do that meditation after my ordinary meditation. And the second thing was the practice of metta, which is very, very similar. Giving love to myself after my 1 hour of meditation. Those are the two things that have worked, and over time I felt better about myself. And sometimes I just find myself talking to myself occasionally and just, you know, watching my thoughts. And if I'm on the point of calling myself a stupid prick or something, then saying, no, let that one, you know, just catch myself saying it and then telling myself that I love myself. I don't know.
Well, that's great, and I hope people who are listening can really listen to that. In terms of compassionate inquiry, we might actually say, whose voice have you got in your head? You know, when I'm working with somebody, whose voice is that in your head? You know, and it could be the voice of a parent, it could be a voice of a teacher, and even if they didn't say that was the messages, and those are the voices we have in the head, and that can really empower us. Actually, thinking, gosh, I'm still carrying the stories and the messages that I was given as a child. But for myself, how I learned to love and like myself was through the practice of metta bhavana. I'd put myself in every stage. I'd put, you know, the person I liked, the person that I didn't like, the part of myself that I was neutral. And that was really great, to just acknowledge there was a part of myself that I didn't like, because when I first came to the practice, I hated myself with a vengeance. That was my mantra, I hate myself. And actually, I got to a point, one of the things I did, I would start saying, I love myself, which would match it. I love myself. And that gave me some freedom, but it didn't give me complete freedom. It's like, well, I'm still having this voice, I hate myself, it's a lot less. What can I do? Still working with the practice of metta. I remember one day saying to myself, I hate myself. And then it was like, but there's no self to hate. What are you hating? What is it that you're hating? Point to what is it you're hating. The only thing is the thoughts in your head. So it's a real, it's a process. It's a process. A doorway is learning to just like a bit of your body, if it's your hair or if it's your hands or your eyes, or just learning to like something, you know. And it's hard. It's hard if you've had the conditioning where hatred has been projected onto you. It's, but you can still be free of this. And I would say for those people is ask for help, reach out for help. You know, I saying all of that, I did therapy as well, you know, to help me with that. Yeah. So reach out for help.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that's the other thing that really helped is I think it was guilt was one of the big things I had to work
Mm,
with, guilt and shame.
mm,
And
mm,
and my therapist would just tell me, well, I quite like what you did. That's fine.
mm,
Why not? When I was,
mm,
when I think I'd done a terrible thing.
mm,
And I think that really helped too, just to
mm,
letting go of guilt, I think was maybe the hardest part.
mm.
I think that was it really doesn't want to go away. But I think,
Often
yeah.
guilt, it's interesting you say that because guilt often masks anger.
Mm,
Mm. Can be a safer space to be, place to be with guilt rather than the energy of anger.
mm.
Mm.
All right. I'll just sit with that one for a second.
Mm.
Mm,
Yeah, guilt. What are you angry about? Mm.
right.
Mm.
Yeah. Now, final questions, because I know you want to go for your swim.
I definitely do before the sun goes. Yeah.
All right. Final question. What is life to you?
Life for me is to be of service. That's just period. Is how can I more and more be of service? You know, I live in a small place, and there are so many benches around. It's like, oh my God, it's like, so is that it? I become a bench. I was just laughing. What's his name? Lewis, who just died, the civil rights campaign. I said, at least
Mm,
he's become a bridge. Um, so uh, and so when I look at that and I think, wow, you know, the people live and they become a bench or they become a bridge or they become a building. And you know, we come into our quote, Angel Kyoto Williams, I remember her saying this, that we come into a life with we come into the world with a breath of inspiration and we leave the world with a breath of expiration. And what I add to that is that what are we doing in between? What are we doing in between? Are we really in touch with the inhale and the exhale? And for me, life is about being of service, whether that's I slow down so that the person in front of me doesn't experience nervousness because I'm trying to get around them, to if somebody reaches out for help, can I be of service? Really, life is about service. What else can it be about? It's to be of service. Yeah.